10. The Stones of the Abbey. Old plans of the abbey, drawn in quaint perspective, show the wide domain that once was within its boundaries. The gatehouse, with its steep roof and chamber over the gate, still looks out on the wide sweep of Magdalen Street. From the row of almshouses with their sunny gardens, the monks' pensioners can still watch the come and go of all the abbey business. Part of the great wall that enclosed the monks' garden is still standing. It towers high above the narrow alleys behind the main street. Snapdragons and red valerian growing in its crannies. Much of it is gone, but the footings can still be traced right out to the abbey barn. The wonderful cruciform barn, finely built of gray lichen-blotched stone, with the statues of the four evangelists high up in their niches, looking down on the wagons and cattle. To everything that the monks built they lent an ecclesiastical touch. There is no mistaking their handiwork. Even the domestic offices were built with the same careful beauty as the great church itself. The abbot's kitchen, still standing, bears witness to their love of beauty and honest craftsmanship. It is an octagonal building with a steep pyramidal roof. Within there are 4 enormous hearths, each designed to roast an ox whole. Beside them are smaller ovens built into the thickness of the wall, presumably for pastries. Nothing could be better designed than the lofty roof of the kitchen for carrying off the heat and fumes of these 4 furnaces, for no other word can describe them, so vast are they. Whole tree trunks must have gone to their stoking. It takes little imagination to people the old gray kitchen with the monastic cook and his scullions, for the great flagstones of the floor bear the marks of their feet. There is something strangely impressive in foot-worn stone. Nothing so humanizes an ancient building as the shallow troughs in its flagstones worn by human feet. Among the broken pillars of the undercroft can still be seen the stone channels which serve the abbey for drainage. They were built on the same system that the Romans used in their villas, and they still perform their task, keeping the ground dry and wholesome. There are wells, too, that serve that large concourse of monks with water. Strangely situated, they seem to us, being right inside the church itself. One well, reputed to be fed from the famous blood spring at the foot of the Tor, is right under St. Joseph's Chapel. The low arch that roofs it, deep down in the darkness at the foot of a narrow, winding stair, is beautifully carved with stone hatchet work, cut in imitation of the chip-carved wood, marvelously wrought with an axe, which was the prototype of architectural decoration in these aisles, the technique of one material being imitated in another before it was realized that scrollwork could be wrought in stone as easily as the angular finds of the hatchet carving. To us, who are accustomed to purely utilitarian domestic offices, it gives much food for thought that the monks should have spent such a wealth of craftsmanship in the unseen parts of their buildings. It proves that they work to the glory of God, rather than to be praised of men. For who save the drawers of water could see the fine carving of the wellhead down among the abbey cellaring? Outside the boundary wall of the abbey are 2 other buildings intimately connected with the monastic life. Looking up the broad Magdalen Street, onto which the Abbey Gate opens, stands the wonderful old Pilgrim Inn, one of the finest examples of Tudor domestic architecture in the country, now known as the George, but originally the Abbey Hotel where hospitality was dispensed to travelers according to the custom of the monastic houses. Many pilgrims were drawn to Glastonbury by the fame of its relics, and no doubt the abbot found them a distraction from holy duties, so the hostel was built without the walls, where neither the worldliness nor the fevers of the visitors would infect the monks. The problem of infection was a serious one during the great epidemics of the Middle Ages, and it was during the Black Death that the tribunal was built, the beautiful old gray stone building in High Street, halfway between the Pilgrim Inn and St. John's Church. Prisoners were apt to revenge themselves on their judges by communicating to them the infectious diseases that were the fruit of foul prisons. The monks were shrewd enough to realize that to bring a prisoner into the abbey, however much they might desire his apprehension, might not be an unmixed blessing. So prisoners and pilgrims were kept at a safe distance, and the abbey maintained a clean bill of health. It is said that there are dungeons below the tribunal, but they have never been explored. It is not the safest thing in the world to dig among the foundations of ancient houses. Up in the triangular channel underneath the eaves, however, the ancient wattle can still be seen. Such wattle as was used in the building of the circular church by Saint Joseph and his 12 companions, the first church in these islands, and, so tradition says, the first church to be built above the ground in Europe. The tribunal and the pilgrim inn have been in uninterrupted use since they were built. The tribunal has been many things in its day. At one time a sisterhood of nuns made it their home, and their flowing black draperies could be seen passing and repassing in narrow streets and entering the low arched doors of the old cottages, carrying imagination back to the Middle Ages and the Glastonbury of the monks. Today the tribunal is a craft shop where are sold the fascinating produces of the artist craftsmen who abound in this part of the world. The old stone rooms are a perfect background for the hand-spun linens and hand-wrought metals. Never did shop and merchandise suit each other more perfectly. The Pilgrim Inn is also in sympathetic hands. Its rooms, with their stone-mullioned windows and erratic floors of huge boards cut from whole trees, its paneling and alleged ghosts, is furnished with fine old furniture that blends with the spirit of the house. The courtyard where the coaches used to drive in has been roofed over and made into a lounge, but under the rugs that strew its floor, the foot can feel irregularities, and if the rugs are turned back, the deep ruts of the couch wheels can be seen in the flagstones that pave it. The soaring pillars of the abbey itself seem remote from human life. They have stood open to the sky so long that the human atmosphere has faded from them, but the ancient stones that bear signs of the daily usage of folk busied with the tasks that we ourselves pursue every day of the week, the sleeping rooms, the cooking places of the men who went before us, these things come home to our hearts, and we feel the unbroken line of our national life stretching back into the remote past, and know that it will reach on into the far future, and that we ourselves are a part of it. 11. The Tor. In the northern part of Somerset, where it borders upon Gloucester, there is a triangular plain, bounded upon two of its sides by the Mendips and the Poldens, and upon the third by the sea. In the center of this plain rises a strange pyramidal hill crowned with a tower. So strange is this hill, so symmetrical in form, and rising so abruptly from the wide-stretching levels, that no one looking upon it for the first time but is impelled to ask what it may be, for it has that subtle thing which, strange as the word may seem when applied to a hill, we cannot call other than personality. Seen from a distance, the Tor is a perfect pyramid, but as we draw nearer, a central hill detaches itself from the crowning foothills, and we see that it is shaped like a couchant lion, bearing a tower upon its chest, and round the central portion, in three great spirals, sweeps a broad, graded crack, known as the Pilgrim Way. The whole hill seems to radiate a strange and potent influence, whether seen afar off from the top of Mendip, or glimpsed unexpectedly from a bedroom window as the curtain is drawn back in the dark. Whether the full moon is sailing serenely in the night sky behind the tower, or whether a dark mass blots out the stars, whether the sun is blazing in a sky of Italian blue, or shreds of cloud are driving past in storm, the Tor dominates Glastonbury. The busy little market at its foot is occupied with the daily life of men, but on the Tor the old gods guard their ground, and in their secret heart the heathen kingdom Wilfred found dreams as she dwells apart. In the center of this, the holiest earth in England, rises the most pagan of hills, for the Tor keeps its spiritual freedom. It has never cried, "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean." Tradition declares that its crest was once crowned by a stone circle like Stonehenge, an open temple of the sun, and that the graded way which winds thrice around its cone was the processional way by which the priests of the sun climbed to the high places of their worship. When the dying paganism handed on the torch to the new faith, the sun circle was cast down, its great stones broken in pieces and flung into the foundations of the abbey, so that the new church rose from pagan roots. The well at the foot of the tor, the dark blood well of ancient sacrifice, was made the hiding place of the sacred cup, the gracious Christian legend twined about the grim stones of the old faith. The invocation of elemental nature was forgotten, and the beautiful tale of the Grail began. Round about the sacred blood well, so the story runs, certain hermits made their cells. But these holy men were so troubled by the principalities and powers that the ancient ritual had summoned to the tor, that in self-defense they built a church upon its summit and dedicated it to Saint Michael, the mighty archangel whose function it is to hold down the powers of the underworld. But even Saint Michael was helpless against the powers of darkness, concentrated by ritual, and in the earthquake of AD 1000, the body of the church fell down, leaving only the tower standing. Thus was the Christian symbol of a cruciform church changed into the pagan symbol of an upstanding tower, and the old gods held their own. Over the door that gives entrance to the tower are carved two curious symbols, which have endured the stress of storm and fanatical zeal, though the statues of the saints have fallen from their niches. Upon one side of the lintel is a bas-relief of the soul being weighed in the balance, and upon the other is the semblance of a cow. What are these symbols doing on a Christian tower? Who that has studied the Egyptian Book of the Dead does not know the symbol of the soul in the judgment hall of Osiris being weighed in the scales against the feather of truth, with the grim jackal of the gods awaiting to devour it if it be found unworthy? And who has not seen there also the cow goddess Hathor, with the moon between her horns? What are these two glyphs doing upon the high tower of Glastonbury Tor? The tor is indeed the hill of vision, for anyone whose eyes have the least inclination to open upon another world. Innumerable stories are told about it. There are some who, visiting Glastonbury for the first time, are amazed to see before them a hill of dreams, which they have already known in sleep. More than one has told of this experience. Many times the tower is reported to have been rimmed in light. A warm glow, as of a furnace, beats up from the ground on wild winter nights, and the sound of chanting is heard from the depths of the hill. Towering forms of shadow and light are seen moving among the ancient thorn trees that clothe the lower slopes, and something which no eye can see drives the grazing cattle down from the heights, and they do not fly from it in panic, but go quietly and orderly at the bidding of the invisible shepherd, who leads them away in order that the sun temple on the heights, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, may be made ready for those who come to worship there. On more than one occasion, we who live upon its flank have been called upon to minister comfort and consolation to those who have actually seen what they went to look for. Wonderful as is the view from the tor by day, when half Somerset lies spread at one's feet, with the far hills of Devon to the south across Bridgewater Bay, and, in clear air after rain, even the hills of Wales to the west, far more wonderful is the sight by night for those who dare to climb in the dark. Most wonderful of all, perhaps, is to climb the tor at sunset and watch the sun go down over the Atlantic. From the tor we see two sunsets, the sun himself in his glory in the west, and the reflection upon the clouds in the eastern sky. To see the moon rising through the rose-pink glow of the low clouds over the darkening marshes is a thing never to be forgotten. As the lights come out in the town at the foot of the hill, it is seen that they form a five-pointed star, for there are 5 roads out of Avalon, to Wells, Mare, Street, Butley, and Shepton Mallet, and the houses following along these roads as men's homes must, clustered most thickly where they leave the town, and becoming fewer as the roads draw off into the marshes, form a perfect star of light about the tor with its tower. There is one time above all others when it is well to ascend the tor at nightfall, and that is at the full moon of the autumnal equinox, round about the Mass of St. Michael. The nights are coming cold then, but the days are still warm with the afterglow of summer, and the cold of the darkness, chilling the warm breath of the meadows, causes a thick but shallow mist to form over the levels, Through this the cattle wade knee-deep as in water, and trees cast shadows in the moonlight, black upon silver. As night closes in, the mist deepens. Like the rising tide in an estuary, it fills the hollows. Trees and barns slowly drown. Only the few scattered knolls, like St. Brede's Beckery, remain as islands in the mist. Lights on the far roads flit like fireflies in the white gloom. Gradually, they too fade as the mist thickens, and Avalon is an island again. Local folk call this shallow mist that lies upon the levels the Lake of Wonder. Through it comes slowly the black barge, rowed by the dumb man, bearing 3 weeping queens, who bring Arthur, wounded unto death at Lyonnesse, that he may heal him of his grievous wound in our green combes among the apple trees. Into the Lake of Wonder Sir Bedivere flings the magic sword Excalibur, graven with strange runes in an unknown tongue, and the white arm of the Lady of the Lake, rising from the rushes, seizes it and draws it under. To this day its jewels, gemming the rusting blade, lie among the marshes, waiting to be found. All these and many more come back to Avalon when the Lake of Wonder rises from its fairy springs under the hunter's moon. But I have seen a stranger thing even than the Lake of Wonder by moonlight. There are times when there falls upon the Glastonbury levels what is known locally as the blight. A strange heaviness that will not turn to thunder is in the summer air. The sun glows dully like a copper disk through the low-lying clouds, and in the oppressive dimness and heat, nerves are on edge with restlessness and uneasiness. On one such occasion, driven desperate by the oppressiveness of the levels, we set out to climb the Tor. Up and up through densest mist, moving in a circle some 10 feet in diameter, shut in by a white wall impenetrable as stone, we climbed to the very summit, and there in a white blindness came out of the mist as suddenly as a train runs out of a tunnel. The crest of the Tor was above the cloud line. The sky was of that deep indigo blue often seen at Avalon, a blue that should be seen through the boughs of an apple tree in blossom. From marge to marge, no cloud flecked its depths. But below our feet there stretched to the very horizon a rolling, billowing sea of purest white, with purple in the hollows. Above our heads was the tower, its shadow flung far out over the cloudy floor. It was as if the world had sunk in the sea, and we were the last of mankind. No sound rose through the mist, no bird circled above us. There was nothing but blue sky, gray tower, billowing mist, and blazing sun. There was no air moving, all was still and silent as the moon. Time went by uncounted, till presently a slight air began to stir. Soon it strengthened to a breeze. Then the clouds began to move. They rolled and banked into the great billows, and flowed towards the sea. Faster and faster as the wind freshened, they went shouldering past below our feet. Soon long rifts began to open in their mass, and we saw the dark Butley woods for a moment, wrapped in deepest shadow. Rifts closed and opened again, and closed again, giving us glimpses of the great cuttings over to Ashcot and the red roofs of Street. Then the water cuts began to show as silver wires through the mist. Sounds began to rise up faintly through the thinning cloud. A cock crowing, a dog barking, distant bells. Then the last of the mist rolled back bodily and went in a flying wall towards the coast, and the levels lay spread in golden sunshine. Twice have I seen that from the Tor, and the sight is never to be forgotten. 12. Glastonbury of today. 1. It is not an easy thing to write of the Glastonbury of today. So much human nature goes to the making of it. There is an old saying that little children and fools should never be shown a thing till it is finished. It is a saying that comes from the East, for it is illustrated by the story of the weaver of carpets who sat in his open-fronted shop in the busy marketplace. Passers-by watched him at his work, and commented on its progress. They pointed to the dingy threads of the spring warp and the innumerable knots, joins, and loose ends. If he had listened to them, he would have thrown down his handiwork in disgust and despair. But despite all the hostile criticism and ridicule by which he was surrounded, the old craftsman went on patiently, adding knot to knot in the fine hand-tufted carpet weaving of the Orient, hundreds of knots to the square inch. Finally, at the end of many moons, the clumsy great loom was creakingly unwound, the ends of the warp were tied, and the glory of the carpet was exposed to the wondering gaze of the crowd. So great was the fame of this carpet, the work of years, that the king sent his vizier to purchase it for the great mosque, where its beauty should glorify Allah. The scoffers were too ignorant to realize that a carpet is worked inside out. Only the wise artist-craftsman knew that. So it is with the world around us. The spirit of the race is pulsating with life. The angels are ascending and descending on Jacob's ladder, but no one sees them except the artist, and he is unheeded. It is the Mad Hatters in our midst who get a hearing, and they tell us that there is a jam yesterday and jam tomorrow, but never jam today. History is life seen in perspective. When history is in the making, as it is at Glastonbury, it is impossible to assess it at its real value. One can think of it only as it affects oneself. The wagons bringing stone to the temple claim right of way across one's cabbage patch. Their clumsy wheels creak and shed clods of mire. The wagoners beat the horses, and the horses kick the wagoners. A grit gets in one's eye as the master craftsman, working in a fine creative frenzy, sends the chips flying. All these things matter, and matter very much to the people on the spot. The world which does homage to the masterpiece does not see the smudged palette and the filthy smock that went to its making. The history of modern Glastonbury has many stories which in due course will get their telling, but we must wait for the perspective of the receding corridors of history before this can be rightly done. It is not easy for us in the present day to stand back and look at those things which have been achieved as history will look at them, not troubling as to whose feelings have been hurt, whose ideals outraged, or whose rights have been treated cavalierly, but seeing rather the gifts that have been brought to the altar of civilization by the artist-craftsmen of Glastonbury, whether they have wrought in words, sounds, colors, or stone, for history is not concerned with their failures, but only with their achievements. The artist has never lived with his head among the clouds of his golden visions, and his feet deeper sunk in the mire of common clay than his neighbors. The skill of his hands in creating beauty seems ever to be equaled by their fumblings in handling stocks and stones. His neighbors, who are well qualified to assess his inaptitude in the mundane sphere, are not equally able to assess his achievement in the things of the kingdom, and so no balance is struck. The artist is penny foolish and pound wise. His clocks never keep time. His accounts never balance. He is God's fool, who sits on the floor of the world and hears the eldest counsel of things that are, the talk of the three in one. Glastonbury has ever been the home of men and women who have seen visions. The veil is thin there, and the unseen comes very near to earth. The very stones of the old town radiate inspiration, as a sun-warmed wall feels warm to the touch like a living thing in the dark. Many folk of diverse views have heard the voices of Avalon, for there are two Avalons, the Christian and the pagan. The Avalon of St. Joseph and St. Brede, and all the bright story of Christendom, and the other, older Avalon, of Mage and Merlin, and the Lady of the Lake, and between the two, belonging to both, weaves the shadowy figure of Arthur, Excalibur in his right hand, and the Grail in his left. Some of those who make the Glastonbury pilgrimage come to do reverence to the dust of saints in the serene green nave of the abbey. Some come to open their souls to the fiery forces going up like dark flames from the Tor. Who shall judge between them? 13. Glastonbury of today. 2. The first stirrings of reawakening life in Avalon came when the family fortunes of the Jardins threw the abbey ruins on the market. Many times had the abbey ruins and the house built from their stone changed hands, seldom passing from father to son. The destructive fingers of the ivy clung to the great stones of the arches, and the flowering things grew in the treacherous rubble of the walls, undermining and pulling apart that which they beautified, and Glastonbury Abbey fell stone by stone, unhonored and untended. Meanwhile, there were those who knew what Glastonbury meant, and they watched and waited, biding their time. The old inn at the foot of the Tor was bought by them as a temporary abiding place, pending the ripening of their plans. It was a tumble-down hostelry that had fallen on evil days since the mail coaches no longer came pelting down the perilous hills from Shepton Market on their way to the cathedral city of Wells. But with the old inn went something that was highly esteemed by its purchasers. A long, narrow strip of garden ran up the steep coombe to a neglected orchard of gnarled apple trees, and where garden met orchard there was an ancient wellhead. From this wellhead a pouring torrent of rust-red water came rushing and leaping down the steep garden. 100 years ago, one of Glastonbury's many seers was told in a dream that the waters of this well had healing properties, and he went there and bathed as bidden, and was cured of his illness. He then put up a bathhouse of grey Mendip stone, enclosing 2 enormous and sinister-looking stone tanks with steps descending into gloom, and announced to the world that a miraculous well had been discovered. The world, which is ever ready to believe what is pleasing, flocked thither in post-chaises and on foot, even from faraway London, and no doubt after the pilgrims had bathed in that icy water in those forbidding tanks, they thought no more of their imaginary aches and pains, having now acquired something tangible to worry about. However, after the first enthusiasm wore off, results did not justify expectations, and the water was very cold, so the beginnings of a spa petered out. Its new owners, however, knew the story of St. Joseph and the cup of the Last Supper. On the flank of the old inn there arose a tall building of grey dressed stone, with a red pan-tile roof, reminiscent of Italy. Therefore it is said its clerical architect drew his inspiration. And lo, the monks were back at Glastonbury. The cliff-like wall of Chalice Well is a landmark for miles. It has a beauty of its own, but its fine proportions, and the old low huddled buildings that once were an inn clustered about its foot. Once again there were watchers beside the Tor, in the very spot where tradition averred the certain anchorites had built their wattle huts and prayed beside the well. Indeed, the old inn had been called the Anchor, a strange name for an inland hostelry, and the antiquarians still argue as to whether its name is reminiscence of holy men who once dwelt there, or of the day when the tides reached to Glastonbury, and coasting and fishing boats tied up at the quays of the Brew. These new anchorites watched patiently beside the well, training lads for far mission fields, and waiting for the day when the abbey ruins and the house built from them should once more change hands, as they knew well that they would. For there is always a curse on despoiled church property, and it never comes down in the direct line of descent. In due time the day came for which they had waited so patiently, and the abbey stones were put up to auction. The Church of Rome bid for them, meaning to make of our English Glastonbury another holy centre and place of pilgrimage. But there was a stranger there, a man from the north, whom none knew, and he bid and bid from a bottomless purse, and all other purchasers fell away save the monks. Finally, after all their patient years of waiting, they too gave place to the man with the bottomless purse, and the abbey was knocked down to the stranger. Then came the revelation as to the identity of the purchaser. The abbey had been bought for the Church of England, and now, irony of ironies, it is in the care of the Bishop of Bath and Wells. That which the old monks so greatly feared has come upon them, and their inveterate enemy has at last gained control of their ancient liberties. Had the Church of Rome succeeded in her design, would we have seen another Buckfast Abbey raised by reverent hands to enshrine the grey ruins, even as they enshrined the little wattled church? Which is the fairer carved stone and painted glass, or the smooth green lawns and the trees? Who shall say? 14. Glastonbury of today, 3. The sale of the abbey was not the only auction at Glastonbury wherein spiritual values came on the market. Disappointed in their plans, the monks at the well no longer desired to retain their foothold in Glastonbury, and the monastery also was put up to auction. To that auction came 3 bidders of importance. One was a manufacturer of woolens, who coveted the holy well for its water power. Another was a wealthy American, and the third was Miss Alice Buckton of Eagerheart fame. But although 3 came to the auction, only 2 arrived there, for the train bearing the rich American broke down out in the marshes. Avalon would have none of her. So the bidding lay between the manufacturer of woolen goods and the author of Eagerheart. The holy well had a certain definite value as a source of water power, just that and no more. For if the price of it went above the price of the equivalent horsepower in boilers, it became an unprofitable investment. But as a source of spiritual power, it was the pearl of great price, and Miss Buckton sold all that she had and outbid the woolen merchant, while the stranded American sent angry telegrams demanding the postponement of the sale, or alternatively, offering to double the price given by the successful bidder. But the auctioneer was not amenable, and so the wonderful holy well of St. Joseph and Merlin and the Grail came into the hands of Miss Buckton, who constituted herself as guardian, holding it in trust for all who made the Glastonbury pilgrimage. A beautiful cover of Somerset oak ornamented with fine wrought ironwork was made to guard the well from contamination, and Miss Buckton, putting on a cloak of blue Welsh linen with silver clasps, explained its history and symbolism to visitors. From time to time the wonderful well chamber is emptied in order that masses of rust-red, filmy fungus may be removed, and it is then possible to climb down a ladder into the mysterious depths and stand where the living sacrifices of the Druids must have stood. When the fungus is away, the crystal clearness of the water becomes apparent, and 15 feet below can be seen the bed of blue lias gravel through which it rises, ice cold from the depths. The massiveness of the masonry also stands revealed. It consists of those cyclopean blocks such as were used by the makers of Stonehenge and Karnak, yet squared and joined with the accuracy of the builders of the Great Pyramid, and set in the fine hard cement, whose secret has been lost with the Romans. 3 sides of the top course of masonry consist of a single block, one of those masses of stone that prehistoric man appeared to be able to handle without the aid of machinery. Who were the builders of the well? No one knows. They were probably of the same race who handled the mighty masses of Stonehenge and Avebury. It is true that Christian legends twine about it, but it is far older than Christ. Its origin goes back to some ancient nature worship, long since lost to man. The monastery itself became a guest house of exceptional interest. Its activities centered around the person of its warden, Miss Buckton, who endeavored to express her ideals through the many activities undertaken there. Of these, the most important artistically was the annual production of Eagerheart, the exquisite little mystery play which made Miss Buckton famous, and which is her magnum opus. As professional actors seldom took part in it, the production was naturally uneven, but the lack of professional finish was more than compensated by the reverence and earnestness of the actors, which made of the West Country town an English Oberammergau. Miss Buckton had a marvelous gift for taking what lies to hand and bringing out its latent artistic possibilities, and her stage settings, all homemade, were of exceptional beauty. Altogether, Eagerheart, in its Glastonbury production, occupied a unique place in the modern English theatre. Many interesting people came to Chalice Well, and were persuaded to give of their best for the entertainment of all those who gathered there, for the doors were thrown open to all comers. Good music, classical dancing, mystery plays, readings, lectures, and many other activities made Chalice Well a great center of interest, not only to its own visitors, but to the townspeople also, who owed its warden a big debt of gratitude for the generosity with which she kept open house to all Somerset. She had also gathered about her a little group of craft workers who used the most primitive of traditional methods, dyeing the raw wool with dye plants collected from the Somerset hedges and lichen scraped off the trees of old orchards, and spinning it with the prehistoric spindle instead of the medieval wheel. The artistic value of such products naturally does not equal that of more sophisticated schools of handicrafts, but of their human value there can be no question. It was a fascinating sight to see the dye pot boiling over a fire of sticks in the orchard, and skein after skein of gaily colored wool hanging to dry on the gnarled old trees, while the steady thud of the looms sounded from a nearby barn. Such things enrich the human spirit, even if they never fail to empty the pocket. Some quaint pottery was made out of clay dug in the orchard. The primitive kick-wheel was used, and gave surprisingly good results in skilled hands. The whole spirit of design and decoration was primitive, and had a significance of its own, not only because of its naive charm, but in its psychology, for here the fundamental urgings of the human spirit towards beauty expressed themselves in their own way, uninfluenced by convention, and the result was of great interest. But apart from the value of these things as assessed objectively, they have a subjective value which cannot be reckoned in silver and gold. They enrich the human soul and bring new values into human life. Miss Buckton had the vision which sees this, and much must therefore be forgiven to imperfections of execution, because it is better that human beings should stumblingly feel their way to self-expression through the making of beauty, than that experts should do it for them and present them with a perfection of artistic achievement which they can neither understand nor appreciate. Such skilled work enriches the world of inanimate things, because new objects of beauty come into being. But the world of human consciousness is enriched when new ideas dawn upon human souls. Beauty must be wrought from within to without, not from without to within. The material world is enriched by perfection of artistic technique, but the spiritual world is enriched by the muddy strugglings that went on at Miss Buckton's kick-wheel and the spilth of her dye-pot. A man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? A dream of heaven was brought a little nearer to earth at Chalice Well during its heyday. A stone once more swings in its place in that dread temple of thy worth. It is by such stones as these, added one to one, that the New Jerusalem is built. 15. Glastonbury of today, 4. With the sale of the Abbey, Glastonbury seemed to wake from its long sleep, and that stirring of spiritual life began which is working like a ferment with ever-increasing vigor as the years go by. Prophecy is a dangerous trade, but we may hazard the guess that history will look back to our English Jerusalem as the cradle of many things that have gone to enrich the spiritual heritage of our race. As the modern monks were drawn to the little town among green Westland fields by the legend of St. Joseph and the Chalice, and Miss Buckton was drawn by the legend of the Grail, so were two others attracted by Excalibur, Rutland Botton, one of the greatest of our modern composers, and Reginald Buckley, who, but for his premature death, might have won for himself a position among modern poets, collaborated in the foundation of a school of music drama in the little West Country town, designing to make of it an English Bayreuth, even as Miss Buckton and her eager heart made of it an English Oberammergau. Here it was that the greatest of our English operas first saw the light of day, the mystical immortal hour, wherein the exquisite and profoundly esoteric Celtic legend of the fairy woman and her mortal lover, as told by Fiona MacLeod, was given expression in sound by Rutland Botton. Then followed the cycle of the Arthurian dramas, the libretti written by Reginald Buckley, and finally there came the somber tragedy of the Queen of Cornwall, adapted from Hardy's great poem. All these were produced in the assembly rooms of Glastonbury, produced as a labor of love, with volunteer workers in the property room, local craftsmen making Excalibur, and painted paper imitating stained glass in the gaunt windows of the little hall. Here was artistic history in the making, Many singers who have since become well known made their debut on this humble and somewhat rickety stage, and here, when twice a year the festivals took place, music lovers came from all over the world, and for a brief period the streets of the little town were filled with artistic folk, short-haired women and long-haired men, all very gay as to garments, and the sounds of the glorious choruses rang out from the windows of all manner of odd places that were in use as practice rooms. I had the unique privilege of seeing a performance of the Immortal Hour, which, timed to fit in with the exigencies of the local buses and trains, began at sunset. The first scene started with broad daylight shining in through the uncurtained windows of the assembly rooms, but as it progressed the dusk drew on, till only phantom figures could be seen moving on the stage, and the hooting laughter of the shadowy horrors in the magic wood rang out in complete darkness, lit only by the stars that shone strangely brilliant through the skylights of the hall. It was a thing never to be forgotten. But alas, the drama school had began with the delicate mysticism of the Immortal Hour, and rose through the noble idealism of the Arthurian cycle, ended with the grim realism of the Queen of Cornwall. It is not yet the time to tell that tragic story. A great thing was lost to Glastonbury and to English music, and everyone is the poorer. To exchange recriminations is simple, to deal justice less easy. Heaven be thanked, it is not our task. Only can we mourn for immortal beauty lost and a stillborn dream. The work of Rutland Boughton led on to that of Lawrence Housman, who has made his home in the nearby village of Street, and who produced in the Glastonbury Assembly Rooms his exquisite little plays of St. Francis. Intimate and fresh with the Franciscan simplicity, the primitive setting of the Glastonbury stage suited them to perfection, and the Oberammergau spirit of our little Westland town again made itself felt, with Brother Juniper trundling Mendip stone in a barrow borrowed from the local builder, and everybody anxious for the struts of the rickety stage, which re-echoed thunderously to his progress. Surely few such country towns have had the privilege of being the birthplace of so much which is of permanent value in the artistic history of our race. To write of the many artistic craftsmen of the district would take too long. We cannot pass by, however, without mentioning some of them, not only because their work is of value in the development of English handcrafts, but because of the joy for the lover of beautiful things and gracious ideals in seeing the things he loves, like the newly created beasts of whom Milton tells, rising from the earth of their origin and pawing to be free. The web half spun on the loom, the pot warm from the kiln, these things have a bloom which is lost when they become merchandise in a shop. Out on the high ridge of the Puldens, where the road to Bridgewater climbs to avoid the treacherous marshes of the levels, there is a certain spot that rings hollow to the tread, for underneath are the cellars where a notable highwayman hid his spoils, near at the hand of his old cottage where he made his home. Outside that cottage today hangs a bunch of raw fleece on a little gibbet of its own, and this is the trade sign of a hand weaver whose loom can be heard thudding within the cottage. Here are produced those grand handspuns that are the joy of the West Country hunting people. At Watchet, on the sea-coast, is made a charming grey pottery, quaint squat teapots with spouts of such substance that nothing but a hammer could possibly chip them. A great virtue in these heavy-handed days, plates that could be used without injury to themselves as arguments in the most virulent family disputes, and quaches and bowls decorated with soft-toned earths like the pottery of the lake-dwellers that is found amid the marshes. Such pottery is not for the fastidious mahogany table with cut glass and fine napery, but with old oak and gay hand-woven linens. It is the most fascinating thing imaginable. There are many folk who delight to spend their summer holidays in wandering from craft worker to craft worker about rural England and picking up examples of their art. Shops they scorn, and will have nothing save what comes out of the workroom straight to their hands, alive with the craftsman's spirit. It is a delightful hobby, this collecting of craft work straight from the hand of the craftsman, backing one's judgment to pick out things which future generations will esteem. Napoleon, when twitted with his lack of family tree, declared that he himself would be an ancestor. So can those who pursue this kindly hobby declare that their discoveries, given time, will become antiques. How much better to encourage the craftsman in this lifetime than the auctioneer of 200 years hence? And what delightful people they are, these folk who make their dreams come true by the work of their hands. There is a spiritual quality in the handmade thing that is lacking to the machine-made. However good may be the design, for the man who makes with his hands the thing which he has himself planned, weaving into it his dreams and the many sacrifices for the sake of his art, giving to it of his best, cannot help loving it by the time he has finished it, and the well-loved thing, warm and worn by human hands, becomes ensouled with a life of its own. It has a distinct personality, and sensitive and sympathetic people are aware of it. The ancients made amulets with ceremonies, and carefully destroyed the instruments of crime, because they knew of this curious property of inanimate objects that have made close contact with the human soul. Like many another secret known to the ancients, we have forgotten this in the hurry of modern life, for we seldom handle the handmade thing. Nevertheless, it is in this that the fascination of craftwork lies, for the things which the artist craftsman makes are alive and friendly and companionable, and we love them, we know not why. Perhaps something of the artist's soul has gone to the making of them. They are not inanimate matter, but so many elves and gnomes and fairies that, like the toys in Hans Andersen's story, talk among themselves when no human is there to listen. There is some fine illuminating done at Wells, also hand-printing from woodcuts, and at Clevedon there is some beautiful weaving of silk and wool and linen dyed with vegetable dyes. Glastonbury, amid its old oaks, has makers of handmade furniture, including those curious chairs that look so hard and are so comfortable, made after the pattern of one that came from the Abbey. Massive chairs, without a nail in them, that came to pieces and packed flat and are put together again with pegs and wedges. Glastonbury is indeed rich in the things of the human spirit, its dreams and its ideals. It has inspired the makers of many beautiful things, and will inspire many more, for its message to mankind is not yet finished in the giving. More will yet be brought to birth in the beloved Isle of Avalon, among our Westland fields. 16. The Gate of Remembrance. Of all the strange happenings associated with Glastonbury, perhaps the strangest are those told in two books which marked an epoch in psychic research, The Gate of Remembrance and The Hill of Vision. Mr. Bligh Bond, well known as an architect and restorer of old churches, had been appointed curator of the Abbey ruins upon their purchase by the Church of England at the famous auction. He was interested in psychic research, and was one day sitting with a psychic friend for automatic writing, when the communicating entity began to give an account of the ancient glories of Glastonbury Abbey, claiming to be the spirit of one of the monks connected with that foundation, and in Saxon English and dog Latin and a very crabbed hand of write expressed his views. Among other things, he told of side chapels, and especially a chapel behind the sanctuary, no record of which had been preserved in any known document. He gave exact measurements, such as an architect would require, and so intrigued were the two experimenters that, having by virtue of his office access to the Abbey grounds, Mr. Bligh Bond set to work to dig for the lost footings of the unknown chapels, described by the dead monk communicating through the hand of his friend. And sure enough, he found them, and they were exactly as described. And not only did they find one chapel, but chapel after chapel, as night after night the old monk answered their questionings in his barbarous jargon. It is these curious experiments and their results that are recorded in that most fascinating book, The Gate of Remembrance, and in The Hill of Vision are given some very interesting prophecies relating to the war, which were ultimately unhappily justified. The publication of these books attracted much attention to the little West Country town, which was already becoming known in connection with its musical festival and the work of Eagerheart at her hostel of the Holy Well. One cannot help being reminded of the Super Circus, which had 3 rings all going at once, and the poor little boy who became permanently cross-eyed in his endeavors not to miss anything. Some of the bad ballads are also apposite, but in the interest of peace, I will refrain from indicating which ones. Communications from different entities continued to come through, and were justified by the excavations. And not only did they come by the original medium, but from others, including a man well known in literary circles in America, and these too were justified by the subsequent excavations. I have had the privilege of reading a portion of the automatic script in the evening, walking down the Abbey with Mr. Bond next morning, watching the pegs put into the unbroken turf among the roots of ancient trees, and seeing the picks of the excavators strike the forgotten footings in less than 20 minutes, exactly where the pegs indicated. The footings ran, not an inch of ground was disturbed needlessly. The clean-cut trench marked out the ancient chapel. Skeptics said that Mr. Bond had access to unknown manuscripts, but no one ever produced them, and his work on the Abbey foundations is one of the most evidential things in modern psychic research. Some interesting work was also done with the divining rod, searching for precious metals, for it was written in the ancient records that when threatened with attack by the Danes, the monks had buried their treasures and then forgotten where they had put them. 2 independent diviners, knowing nothing of each other's work, found the same metals at the same places and approximately the same depth. I had the interesting experience of watching one of these diviners at work. She was a cultured gentlewoman, and water divining with her was a hobby. Instead of a hazel rod, she used a very modern contrivance, an aluminum Y-shaped hollow tubular rod set in bicycle handles so that it could revolve freely, and equipped with a cyclometer that counted the revolutions it made. There could thus be no question of manipulation, for the rod swung loosely in the handles, which alone were gripped. The reason for this device was that the hands of the diviner used to become badly blistered by the rapid rotations of the rough hazel rods she had originally used when she first discovered her gift. When seeking precious metals, she would take a piece of the metal she sought in her hand, silver or gold, as the case might be, and when she passed over the spot where its fellows lay hidden, the rod stirred responsively. She judged the depth at which the hidden treasure was concealed by the number of revolutions the rod made, hence the reason for the cyclometer. The writer attempted to use the rod, but without result until the diviner, coming behind her, took hold of her elbows, and then there ran down her arms a current of electricity so strong as to be decidedly unpleasant, and the rod began to twitch uneasily, though without actually turning over. All such goings-on, however interesting they might be to those who had no responsibilities in the matter, not unnaturally fluttered the clerical dovecotes, and the trustees of the Abbey began to look with a sour eye on Mr. Bligh Bond and his doings, and after much heartburning on both sides, his connection with the Abbey came to an end. It is still a moot question whether the trustees should be regarded as much abused persons who had warmed a viper in their bosoms, or hens who had hatched out a swan. Another interesting matter, though not directly connected with the Abbey, may perhaps be mentioned before we pass on to other ground. Mr. Bond's daughter, who had never received any training in draughtsmanship, suddenly began to produce automatic drawings. These were not the usual nebulous efforts of so-called automatists, but remarkable studies of the nude, reminiscent in their detailed precision of the sketchbooks of Leonardo da Vinci. They were produced with extraordinary rapidity, without any model or instruction, and without the redrawing of a single line. How did a young girl come by her knowledge of the lay-on of the muscles of the human form, most intricate of studies? Here was another problem for the skeptics. But although the figures she drew were automatically accurate, they were far from human. Strange ethereal forms of nature spirits and demons with uncanny eyes, like star sapphires, flew and wreathed across her pages. The walls of the cottage occupied by Miss Bond and her father on the Shepton Mallet Road were covered with these strange figures, a most marvelous picture gallery, until the scandalized incoming tenant exorcised them with a coat of whitewash. Strange psychic experience, too, visited her there under the shadow of the Tor, and she was told of them in a very remarkable book, Avernus, a book remarkable both for its psychic record and for its literary quality. Some strange things have happened to more than one person under the shadow of the Tor. 17. The finding of the chalice. A few years ago, before the war, there was a certain silly season which was enlivened by long columns and much correspondence in the newspapers concerning the finding of an alleged chalice at Glastonbury under mysterious circumstances, wherein a pure virgin, led of a dream, discovered an antique cup, believed to be the Grail, in a holy well. This exciting incident was running its course as a 9 days wonder when a letter was received from a reputable gentleman saying that the cup was his property and he himself had placed it where it was found. So the whole affair fell flat, and the newspapers concerned in booming it hastily changed the subject. The actual facts of the matter, so far as they can be ascertained, for folk are secretive in these affairs, are of great interest and curiosity. The story begins with the visit of a certain professional man to Genoa when on his holiday. His father was a connoisseur of glass, and he was in the habit of picking up odd specimens for him and dispatching them home from abroad. Visiting an antique dealer on this quest, he was shown a shallow dish of archaic design and told that it had recently been discovered built into the masonry of the chapel of a nunnery, which was being pulled down. He bought the dish for a modest price and dispatched it to England. In return, there came a letter from his father in which was said, "You little realize what you have sent me." The death of the older man occurred, however, before the purchaser of the mysterious dish returned to England, so he never heard what the old connoisseur of the glass had to say concerning it. Soon after his return, however, he began to be troubled by a recurring dream, which urged, commanded, and even threatened him that he should take this old piece of glass to Glastonbury and place it in a certain well, which would be shown to him. Finally, so much did this dream work upon his mind, that he did with his treasured dish as he was bidden. He took train to Glastonbury, placed it below the water level in an old sluice in the fields near the station, where under aged thorn tree the cattle come down to drink, and returned to his home with a lighter heart, telling no man. But the matter did not end here. Presently another man began to get a recurring dream, a man dedicated to the pursuit of mystic knowledge, and he was told that he was to take with him a pure virgin and go to Avalon, and that in a place which should be revealed to him, she should find the Holy Grail. Obeying the counsel, he persuaded his cousin to accompany him, and as instructed in the dream, they went straight to St. Brede's Well, the little spring guarded with old stonework near her hermitage of Beckery, the low mound out in the marshes. There they searched the pool, but found nothing. Disappointed and discouraged, they returned to spend the night at the hostel, intending to return to town next day. But in the night a dream came to the young girl, who had acted as seeker in this strange expedition, and she arose in the darkness before dawn, and went again to the well alone, and taking off her clothes under shelter of the thorn trees, she got bodily into the pool, and groped in its trampled mire, seeking that which had been promised. At almost her first step her foot couched something, and out of the mud she drew forth a strange-looking dish of a coarse bluish glass, with little crosses bedded in its substance. The curious dish was subsequently shown to authorities on old glass, and they declared it to be one of two things: either a glass made in Syria at the beginning of the Christian era, or else a specimen of the reproductions of this Syrian glass made at Venice in the 14th century. In any case, it was a rare and precious thing. As ill luck would have it, the newspapers got hold of this incident, turned it before behind, and blazoned it abroad, a little premature credulity and much exaggeration being followed by equally premature skepticism and repudiation. When the two pieces of this curious story are put together, however, and turned right side up, which was a thing the newspapers never achieved, what is to be made of it? The facts are vouched for by people whose bona fides are beyond question. At the present time, the mysterious dish is reverently cherished in a little shrine, made in its honor by those into whose possession it came. 18. Avalon and Atlantis. When the Romans came to Britain, they found savage tribes dwelling in stockaded villages in dense forests. Roads there were none, save the perilous tracks that led through the swamps from village to village. Nevertheless, the Romans were not the first road makers in Britain. Over the uplands went the ways of an ancient civilization, which had fallen to dust and been forgotten ages before the Romans conquered the Tin Islands. What the Roman remains are to us, so were these ancient tracks to them. Wherever the short, close turf of the chalk defied the trees, there were the traces of an ancient, organized civilization upon a vast scale. Its roads, its guardhouses, its dew ponds, and most wonderful of all, its giant standing stones, which to this day among the country people are called Sarsen stones. The etymologists tell us that the word Sarsen is a corruption of Saracen, or stranger. Who were the strangers who erected the great stones? History cannot tell us, for its records do not reach beyond the dawn of our civilization. But before that dawn, there was the twilight of another civilization. History may ignore it, folklore may move in circles, nevertheless the vestiges remain. Great stones on the uplands and greenways winding across the chalk bear witness to the works of an ancient people long since fallen on sleep. There are traditions more ancient than folklore, which tell of a golden age when the gods walked with men and taught them the arts of civilization. But even these gods themselves were not the first of created things. They had predecessors, giants whom they overcame and whose kingdoms they took by storm. These most ancient and terrible ones, gods of the rocks, were the first of created beings. Everywhere do we find this tale of an ancient race, this myth of the gods who made the gods in the dim twilight of the dawn of ages. But there is another story that companions it, the story of a drowned land and lost civilization. The ancient tradition of Chaldea has it, and the songs of our own Celtic tradition are full of it. For us it is the lost land of Lyoness. Those church bells can be heard ringing in the Atlantic beyond the stormy coast of Cornwall, where the dark figure of Merlin moves through the mists of legend. A figure that baffled even the makers of the songs that told of his power and wisdom. They knew not whence he came, nor what he was. Merlin was the guardian and teacher of two children, Arthur Pendragon, King of Britain, and Morgan Le Fay, the dark Lilith of our island legend, sometimes identified with the Lady of the Lake, and reputed to be the half-sister of Arthur. Who was Merlin with his profound science, and these two children whom he taught? The fairy woman, not of mortal birth, and Arthur, whom the magician bred according to some secret science of his own, regardless of human law. Here are many threads that have never been unraveled and pieced together. Does there exist a clue that shall reveal the significance of these ancient tales and justify their wisdom? Or shall we dismiss them as idle fancies woven to pass away the long hours of darkness around the fires of the tribes of Britain? We may dismiss the tales, but we cannot dismiss the great stones on the uplands, nor the ancient roads between them. Here then is another story, one more to add to the fairy fantasy woven about these ancient days of the twilight of our race. The Egyptian priests, themselves the heirs of a tradition of extreme antiquity, told Plato of an even older civilization, of which their own was the descendant. They told him of a lost land to westward, drowned by the waters of the Atlantic. The ancients accepted these statements for fact unquestioningly. It remained for later ages to cast doubt upon them, and finally to reject them as such stuff as myths are made of. But have they been finally rejected? There is a steadily increasing body of opinion which is inclined to view the mythical lost continent of the Atlantic as offering the solution to many of the problems of prehistory. The data on which the evidence is based and the conclusions drawn therefrom may be found in many books. I cannot enter upon them here, for they are not germane to my subject. Nevertheless, they indicate that I am not altogether without justification for the pattern in which I have pieced together the fragments of legend that lie buried in the holiest earth in England. What is my theory, then, to add one more to the innumerable company of speculations already extant? Let us begin at the very beginning, as the children say, when a story is to be told, and tell something of the tale of lost Atlantis. and see whether it has any bearing on our own island tradition of Merlin and Arthur and the drowned land of Lyonesse. From the center of the Atlantic, reaching out towards what is now Central America, so the secret tradition goes, there was a great continent whereon dwelt the root race that succeeded the Lemurians and preceded our own. There was a great civilization built up with the help of the gods, who then dwelt among men. There was built the wonderful city of the Golden Gates, concerning which the folklore of all races has a tradition. This city, so we are told, was built upon the flanks of an extinct volcano on the sea coast of this ancient land. Behind it was a plain stretching back to the inland mountain ranges. It was an isolated pyramidal hill, shaped like a truncated cone, with one side, the island side, sheared off into a precipice. At its base there was a vast concourse of wattle huts, in which dwelt the bearers of burdens. On the shoulders of the mountain dwelt the merchant and craftsman castes, and upon its flat top were the palaces and colleges of the sacred clan, which was divided into two branches, the military caste and the priesthood. This sacred clan was most carefully segregated from the rest of the population, and its breeding was carried out under the supervision of the priests. As soon as the boys of this clan were of an age to show their dispositions, those who were deemed fit were taken into the sacred colleges to be prepared for the priesthood, and those who were not suitable for this discipline were sent to the military colleges to be trained for the army. The maidens of the sacred stock were guarded with the greatest care, and were given in marriage to priests or soldiers, according to their lineage and temperament. So was the heritage of the sacred clan kept pure, and a carefully selected stock bred for the development of those rarer powers of the mind, so highly esteemed among the ancients, and so little understood among ourselves. The powers which enabled the Greeks and Egyptians to discover the basis of modern astronomy, and the atomic theory of chemistry, and the cellular structure of organic matter, without the aid of any of the instruments whose invention modern science has had to await for its development. The Atlanteans, the old tradition tells us, were great navigators, ranging in trade from the Black Sea to the Pacific. They were also great colonizers, and wherever they planted their colonies, they brought their priests and their altars. They were sun worshippers, and adored the Lord and Giver of life in open circular temples, paved with great flagstones and marble basalt. They themselves were of giant stature, and they possessed the knowledge of utilizing the latent force in germinating seeds as a motive power. Their architecture was of the Cyclopean type, great blocks of dressed stone that no primitive man could have handled. Now, what of our own Avalon in connection with this story? Is there any possibility that in the legends of Merlin and the drowned lands of Lyonesse, we are touching the history of Los Atlantis? The Atlanteans, so Plato tells us, were great seafarers and colonizers. Is there any possibility that Avalon, with its undercurrent of pagan legend, was originally an Atlantean colony? Is it possible that Merlin was an Atlantean, a priest initiate, and in presiding at the birth of Arthur, he was carrying out the Atlantean customs of the king's bread for wisdom? In order to bring the higher consciousness of the evolved Atlantean race into the Celtic tribes of the colonized island, did Merlin, in defiance of the strict laws of the sacred clan, and in pursuit of ends of his own, cross the Atlantean stock on the Celt, and so breed Arthur? And was Morgan Le Fay, the half-sister of Arthur, the witch woman learned in all sciences, with her name derived from the Celtic word for sea, a purebred Atlantean, the British-born daughter of the sea people? Welsh legend is full of stories of drowned lands, and Lyonesse, being beyond the coast of Cornwall, is a tradition of the Cornish Celts. Is it possible that these drowned lands are the lost Atlantis? Did the Celts learn of that ancient civilization from the adventurous navigators who came to them for trade and settled among them as colonists? It is noteworthy in this respect that the peculiar combination of consonants TL, which occurs in the word Atlantis, is very characteristic of the languages of the Aborigines of Central America, and that a similar sound exists in the initial full of the Welsh language, which is pronounced as a guttural click. It is also noteworthy that the spread of the Arthurian legends corresponds with the distribution of the standing stones of the ancient sun worship. Do we owe the green roads of England, winding over the chalk, to this ancient race of seafarers who colonized the southern half of Britain and planted their trading posts along the west coast of Scotland? Was it they who raised the Cyclopean stones, so closely resembling those found standing today in the virgin forests of Central America? Is the streak of psychism that runs through the Celtic race due to the Atlantean blood introduced by the daring experiments of Merlin, the Atlantean initiate, who had thrown into his lot with the island peoples after his own race was sunk in the sea? One more curious point may be referred to here, and its value and significance left to the discernment of the reader. Those who have seen the famous Glastonbury tour, about which so many legends gather, are always perplexed as to whether it is natural or artificial. Its pyramidal form, set in the center of a great plain, is almost too good to be true, too appropriate to be the unaided work of nature. Viewed from near at hand, a terraced track can nearly be seen winding in 3 tiers round the cone of the tor, and this is indisputably the work of man. Who were they who worshipped in high places and climbed to them by a processional route? It is well known that the ancients delighted to build their colonial cities upon the same plan as the mother city in the land of their race. Is it possible that our strange pyramidal hill, with its truncated top and its inland side as steep as earth will stand, may have been wrought to that likeness by human hands in memory of the sacred mountain of the mother continent? Here and there about the plain are rounded hills, still called islands locally, hills with no rocky skeleton, but of boulder clay, left behind in some eddy of the Severn before the silting sands had narrowed its channel. It would not be a difficult matter to take such a mound of clay, and with no other tools than picks and baskets, mold it to the desired shape. Tradition tells that the tor was indeed a high place of the ancient sun worship, and that a circle of stones like a miniature Stonehenge once stood upon its crest. These stones were overthrown when the worship of the sun supplanted that of the sun, but so strong were the forces generated in the spot sacred to the rites of an older race that a church dedicated to St. Michael had to be erected upon the spot in order to keep down the dark influences of the pagan worship. These churches to St. Michael, built upon the tops of hills, which certainly could not have been for the convenience of the parishioners, are characteristic of districts where the ancient sun worship is known to have flourished. Legends of Arthur, standing stones, and hilltop churches to St. Michael all seem to go together. St. Michael is always represented as treading upon a serpent. He is the mighty archangel of the south in magical invocations, and to the south is assigned the element of fire. Here again we have a curious link. The Atlanteans were sun worshippers, and fire is the mundane symbol of the sun. Its sacred quarter is the south, just as the sacred quarter of Christianity is the east. The serpent is a symbol of 2 things, of wisdom and of evil. May it not be that the serpent in its dual aspect represents the ancient wisdom in an older race, a wisdom fallen on corruption, and therefore evil to a regenerated faith, yet nevertheless a mind of the profoundest knowledge? Michael, the Christian saint, is a member of our older hierarchy. He is the mighty regent of the element of fire. Who but he should be implored to hold down the serpent of fire worship, fallen on decadence? There are no standing stones left now upon the tor, but tradition asserts that they were broken up and used in the foundations of the abbey, and indeed there are stones found in the abbey which were cut in no local rock, and are of a hardness to turn the tools of the local masons. May not these be the fragments of the ancient Sarsens, the stones of the strangers, who used for their temples the mighty boulders of an extreme hardness which occur in chalk, where silicates have mingled with the sand, and which form the gray weathers of many an upland pasture? Whether tradition speaks true or not, there exists at the foot of the tor the prehistoric wellhead, wrought of just such cyclopean blocks as were used by the builders of Stonehenge, Karnak, and the buried temples of the Mayas and Toltecs. To the well chamber is the niche for human sacrifice, the water sacrifice of a sea people, and we are told that it was the love of the Atlanteans for human sacrifice and black magic of the basest kind which brought about their downfall and led to the destruction of their land. Where lost Atlantis sank, there is the deepest gulf in all the oceans, to this day an unplumbed abyss, and over it floats the Sargasso Sea, a vast island of seaweed so dense that gulls alight upon its surface and ships lay their course to avoid it. All this is speculation, not history, modern myth-making, not research. But standing alone upon the Tor, when the Lake of Wonder all but closes over it, one cannot forget the end of lost Atlantis. 19. The Vision of Avalon. The atmosphere of Glastonbury is like a fugue with the threads of many tunes running through it, wherein now one comes to the surface and now another, but all are there all the time weaving a background of harmony below harmony to the motive of the moment. It is this intricate counterpoint of the Glastonbury atmosphere that has puzzled many people, for Avalon cannot be claimed by any sect as their private sanctuary. It belongs neither to artist nor to Anglican, neither to psychic nor to pagan. All these have their part in Avalon, and none can deny the rest. It is not for its historical significance that Glastonbury is of importance to the spiritual life of our race today. Many places are rich in history and legend, but they are not the holiest earth in England. Glastonbury is a spiritual volcano wherein the fire that is at the heart of the British race breaks through and flames to heaven. There are times in the history of races when the things of the inner life come to the surface and find expression, and from these rendings of the veil the light of the sanctuary pours forth. To them we look when we seek inspiration. Glastonbury is rarely rich in these things. Here we find holy relics of many sides of the soul's experience. The deep, remote past of our race is here. Through the valleys of Avalon moves an invisible pageant in an endless procession. The darkness before the dawn is shot through by the magic of Merlin the Atlantean. The dark wild men of the mare go past, fierce eyes gleaming under matted hair. After them come the white-robed druids with their golden sickles, bearing the holy mistletoe, and followed by the captives taken in battle, destined for the sacrificial niche in the holy well. Then comes the bowed figure of old Saint Joseph, frail and solitary, bearing the cup. King Arthur rides forth, a strong man in his strength, about his neck the crystal cross which was given him by the Mother of God at Beckery, Excalibur at his side. Guinevere rides beside him in her beauty, her golden hair flowing over her shoulders. The time has not yet come when the shorn plate shall lie in the desolate coffin of the shamed queen, who is buried, not at her husband's side, but at his feet. Behind them follows the Lady of the Lake, seen as if through deep water, waiting the time when Arthur shall return to her after the last battle, borne in the black barge, watched by the weeping queens, and Excalibur shall come back into her hands, lost to men forever. And after all these follow three maidens robed in white, and amid them a glory that is not of any earthly fire, a glory long gone from men because of their wickedness, caught up to the heavenly city of Aris, some say, but others buried among the green fields of Glastonbury. When the dreams fade and memory begins, all the pageant of medieval England goes past us as we look into the mirror of time at Avalon. Sometimes a troop of damsels glad, an abbot on an ambling pad, sometimes a curly shepherd lad, or long-haired page in crimson clad, goes by to towered Camelot, and sometimes through the mirror blue the knights come riding two and two, Sir Launcelot seeking one thing, and Sir Galahad another, still they come to Avalon. Through the magic mirror the long procession winds, the lowly anchorites, burning with a frenzied zeal, the learned and pious Benedictines, whose great building abbots gave beauty to English fields, and last of all, an old man bound to a hurdle, dragged at the heels of a heavy farm horse, and after that fallen crowers and roofless wats in darkness. Excalibur has returned to the heart of the waters. The Grail has gone to its own place, the temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. The abbey walls have fallen, the pageant is over. The dream passes, and the light of common day returns. The cry of cocks on distant farms, the bark of dogs, the bleat of lambs, the smell of peat smoke and apple blossom blended. All that makes our Westland spring flows in through the five senses. But the memory of other things remains. What might there not be for us if we would revive the old-time custom of pilgrimage to holy places at holy seasons? There are tides in the inner life, and on the crest of their flood we are very near to heaven. There are times when the power tides of the unseen flow strongly down upon our earth, and there are also places upon her surface where the channels are open, and they come through in their fullness of power. This was known to them of old time, who had much wisdom that we had forgotten, and they availed themselves of both times and places when they sought to awaken the higher consciousness. Every race has its holy centers, places where the veil is thin. These places were developed by the wisdom of the past until a powerful spiritual atmosphere was engendered there, and consciousness could easily open to the subtler planes where the messengers of God came to meet it. The standing stones of a forgotten sun worship remain at many a spot in our islands, and any sensitive soul will be able to feel the atmosphere of ancient power that still hangs over them. Whether it be the blood-stained aura of Stonehenge or the vibrant sunlit glow of Avebury, do not let it be forgotten that there is a native mystery tradition of our race which has its nature aspect in the sun worship of the Druids and the beautiful fairy lore of the Celts, its philosophical aspect in the traditions of alchemy, and its spiritual aspect in the hidden church of the Holy Grail, the church behind the church, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. All these have their holy places, mounts, and pools of initiation, which are part of our spiritual inheritance. Let those who follow the inner way study our native tradition and rediscover and re-sanctify its holy places. Let them make pilgrimage there too, at the times when the power descends and spiritual forces are rushing in, like the tide up an estuary and every common bush afire with God. Let them keep vigil in the high places when the cosmic tides are flowing, and the powers of the unseen are changing guard, and the rituals of the invisible church are being worked near the earth. 20. The Grail and the Chalice. Before King Arthur's knights set forth on their quest of the Holy Grail, they received the sacrament. If we consider this point carefully, as we should consider all points in a mystical story, we shall find that it yields much food for thought. Why should those who were able to receive the chalice at the altar seek also the Grail? What more had the Grail to give than the chalice could bestow? The legend points us to a mystic interpretation of the Eucharist. It shows us that in order to make our communion a spiritual experience, we have to do something more than present ourselves kneeling at the altar rails and receive into our hands a cup blessed by the priest. We have to go forth on a quest of our own and find for ourselves the actual cup out of which our Lord drank the wine of life. Not otherwise can the potentialities of the chalice become for us the actualities of mystical experience. The Grail is the prototype of the chalice, and it is from the Grail that the chalice draws its validity. If there had been no Last Supper, there could have been no Eucharist. Nevertheless, the Eucharist is more than a commemoration. Our Lord asked of those who desired to share a place in his kingdom whether they could drink of the cup he drank of, and be baptized with the baptism he had been baptized with. We know what the baptism was. It was the descent of the Holy Spirit in the likeness of a dove. The dove was but a symbol under which finite senses apprehended the manifestation of the flaming power of the third aspect of the Logos, and the cup is equally the symbolic equation of the inner experiences of our Lord went through in the cosmic act which redeemed and regenerated mankind. The crucifixion at the hands of Roman authority was but the material manifestation of the spiritual struggle that was going on. It was not the spilling of the blood of Jesus of Nazareth that redeemed mankind, but the outpouring of spiritual power from the mind of Jesus the Christ. Behind every material object used in ritual, there is a spiritual prototype. The spiritual prototype is created by an experience which has been undergone by a living spiritual being, just as a tragedy may cause a place to be haunted because the intense emotion there experienced remains in the mental atmosphere. So any great spiritual experience, especially when undertaken vicariously of set purpose, creates a thought form charged with spiritual potency. Herein lies the power not only of our Lord's supreme sacrifice upon the cross, but also, in their degree, of the penances and martyrdoms of the saints. Thought forms are created by the dedicated vicarious suffering, which is transmuted into spiritual power. By means of the psychical symbol, whether it be cross or chalice, or relic of the saint, thought is focused upon the sacrificial act. We contact the thought form, and its stored-up potency discharged into our souls. We are reminded of the spiritual quality which motivated the sacrifice, and the corresponding quality is stirred in our own hearts. We are stimulated by an inspiring example to go and do likewise in our degree. The cross is only valid for us insofar as we crucify the lower self and its lusts. The chalice is only valid for us insofar as Christ is risen in our hearts, and we are striving to realize the Christ life. Unless we can share in the inner life of a symbol, its outer form will convey nothing to us. Unless we have made a voluntary sacrifice for pity's sake, we will learn little from meditation on the cross. Unless we have felt the burning light of a living spirit contact quickening our hearts, we shall receive nothing from the chalice. The consecrating words of a priest make the cup into a chalice, but it is only the consecrating consciousness of the communicant which can change the chalice into the grail. Like King Arthur's knights, we must not rest content with the chalice in the chapel, but go forth in quest of those great adventures of the soul, which shall bring us at last to partake of the grail in the church, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Epilogue. And what of Glastonbury today? Chalice Well is a boys' school. Bly Bond is in America, secretary of the American Society for Psychic Research. The excavations at the Abbey are no longer directed by the spirits of the old monks, but by learned archaeologists who drive deep trenches here, there, and everywhere. One sometimes wonders whether what they find is of as great worth as the smooth green of the perfect turf used to be. Everything is admirably cared for and labeled, and I know that wallflowers and snapdragons and red valerian ought not to be allowed to grow on old ruins, because their roots tear the stones apart. But somehow one looks back on the old, untidy, thrilling days with regret. All that is left is Joe, who used to care for the perfect turf, and who tells tales of ancient glories to sympathetic listeners. They say that men who tend horses grow like them. Joe only needs a robe and a cowl and a rope round his middle to be the living prototype of all the jolly old monks of medieval story. He no longer tends the turf now that a motor mower has arrived, but most appropriately presides over the abbot's kitchen, the noblest lay brother of them all, and a very old friend of mine. I believe that he and I are the last survivors of the great days of Glastonbury. The School of Music Drama, founded by Rutland Boughton in the big house in Bovistown, after the vicissitudes to which all artistic enterprises are liable, came to an end. Its gaily clad and unconventional students no longer bring a torch of Montmartre to our old sober West County streets, to the great scandal of the local yokels. Fame has come to its founder, and though we cannot forget that his students went about without hats, and even without stockings, we are beginning to be proud of his association with the town. When he is dead, we shall be very proud of him. The British Israelites, who also esteemed Glastonbury as a holy place, opened a centre in the house that was once occupied by Bly Bond, but that too came to an end. In fact, the Abbey ruins and my guest house are the only enterprises in Glastonbury that have stood the test of time. The last thing of interest to happen here was the end of the world, which has now occurred 3 times. Glastonbury is very conveniently situated for this event, for it has been prophesied that the top of the Tor will stick out of the will stick out of the waters when the end comes, and all who gather thereon shall be saved. People have come to live in Glastonbury for this reason, and whenever the date for the end of the world is announced, they rush home from their holidays and pack their picnic baskets and put them handy in the hall. Two ladies once gave away all their winter woolies because the end of the world had been prophesied for a date early in September, and when November came and no end of the world, had to ask for them back again, to the great disgust of the recipient, who had now missed the July sales. Mr. Powys makes use of this prophecy in his book Glastonbury Romance, which has fluttered our local dovecotes to a painful extent. Do we behave like that at Glastonbury? I hadn't noticed it. I must have missed a lot. I am afraid that if people make the Glastonbury pilgrimage, expecting to find Glastonbury Romance at the end of it, they will be disappointed. We do not quite come up to Mr. Powys's specifications. Having had so much to say about everyone else, I had almost omitted to mention myself, though I hardly know whether I should be classed as one of the local celebrities or one of the local sights, probably the latter when I am gardening. In the heyday of Glastonbury, when it was the English Bayreuth, we used to say that there dwelt in Glastonbury the Glastonburians and the Avalonians. The Glastonburians were those who only knew the place as a market town and a tourist center, and the Avalonians were those who were in touch with its spiritual life. I believe that I am the last of the Avalonians, of those who were drawn to Glastonbury as a center of ever-renewed spiritual and artistic inspiration, and the story of my doings is quite as quaint as the rest of the Glastonbury romances I have chronicled. Nowadays, every other house has at least beds for cyclists, but in the good old days accommodation was limited and rather sketchy, and I lifted up my voice in woe and lamentation that this should be so on the holiest earth in England. And someone suddenly presented me with a 40-foot army hut from a camp that was being broken up in the neighborhood. Needless to say, a 40-foot hut is not the kind of gift one looks in the mouth, and quite undeterred by the fact that I had nowhere to put it, I accepted it. And the next thing I knew was that I was sitting at the station, ticking up tuppences for demurrage, and a 40-foot hut can tick them up pretty fast. I ran round the town with that practically under my arm, looking for a place to put it down, till everyone was sorry for me. It is well known that there is a special providence that looks after drunkards, little children, and fools, and it took me in hand, and lo, there is my hut high up on the side of the tor, standing firm to this day. We made it a hostel for Avalonians, choice spirits who did not mind the climb. We have stuck bits onto it before and behind, and though the accommodation is still sketchy and limited, and we do not recommend it to the sophisticated, it extends a welcome to all who are Avalonians at heart. Looking out over the roofs from our high veranda, I often wonder whether the life of Avalon will ever stir again, or whether we shall be no more than a tourist show and a market town. Will these dead bones come together, bone to his bone, as they did at Buckfastleigh? There is talk of a great new abbey to rise under the shadow of the old. Every summer at Midsummer's Day a high cross of larch poles stands on the tor behind us, gaunt against the sky, and a long procession winds up, monks and nuns and children of Mary, and the sound of singing comes to us, and a man's voice preaching fervently. If any place could become the English Lourdes, it is our Avalon. Glastonbury has done her fair share of stoning the prophets, but I fancy the Holy Roman Church is made of sterner stuff than Bly Bond, with his otherworld vision, and Rutland Botton, with his dream of beauty, and I, for one, hope she will make good her footing, and, impenitent heathen though I am, that I shall hear her Angelus from my high veranda. Chalice Orchard, Wellhouse Lane.